All right. Well, I think we're live. Well, welcome to the first of many live streams. My name is Clossington, and I will be your host for this weekly show. This stream will mostly cover political theory, history, and current events. The purpose of this first show, however, is to identify the teleology that can spawn an anti-progressive movement and inoculate the West against the corrosive force of antinomialism and deterritorialization. But first, I want to introduce my panel of guests. So, guys, what's your background? What are your political philosophies? I guess, Mr. Jia Khan, you can start first.
Hello there. My name is Mr. Jia Khan. I was formerly known as Ghost of Buckley before I switched my avatar name. I've been on YouTube for a while now, and I just recently started making a YouTube channel called the Geoconservative. Links below. I've been to college, and I've graduated with a history degree, and I often research a lot of history stuff and philosophy stuff. But I've read a whole lot of literature on a whole lot of different topics. What I do think, intellectually, philosophically wise, I'm a Georgist and I'm a conservative, more of a paleoconservative than not. And I'm also sort of an eclectic. I believe that you should borrow ideas from all over the place, and so my ideas incorporate a lot of different ideas from all across the right-wing spectrum and even some left-wing ones. So that's how I would describe myself, an eclectic. So
all right, fair enough. Zed, where are you coming from?
Well, I suppose I'm coming from a position of officially being a nationalist, although when people in Ireland say nationalist, we mean ethno-nationalist. Because an ethno-nationalist is basically what we mean, because we didn't really have a properly defined ethno-survivalist movement, I suppose, in Ireland until very recently. So we don't want it to become some kind of conservatism or cookery or something like that. So that's why we define ourselves as ethno-nationalists. Well, nationalists. We don't even like using the word ethnos, but that's what we are actually. And where I'm coming from is, I suppose, just basically a desire to preserve the genetic code of my people, and that's it. Like, I don't know what else to say, to be honest.
All right, Jan the Baptist, where are you coming from?
Yeah, that's my name. I'm from Finland. I'm finishing up my university studies. I'm studying economics, and I've been into this NRX thing for 2 years now, something like that. And I went to standard liberal to libertarian to conservative to wherever this is pipeline.
Right.
And NRX, let's just say, monarchist, maybe, not necessarily. Anarchist, definitely, to use the new Mulbuggian phrase. And that's aspiring homesteader. Let's go with that.
All right.
I sort of have an aesthetic attraction to the pastoral life, to the homestead.
Could you explain what you would call an archist?
Wait a second.
Okay, sorry.
Archist, we'll get into that a little bit later, but this is just introductions. Sutler's Lament, glad to have you on.
Thanks.
What are you?
I'd like to keep it pretty simple. I just call myself a traditional conservative. I guess Catholic too. And that is a worldview. It's not just a religion. Not that any religion is just a religion. But so yeah, I mean, I really would just leave it at that. I am very interested in NRX ideas, but I wouldn't really call myself a neo-reactionary. I mean, I don't even really consider it to be a living movement. I consider it to be a brief sort of internet phenomena from 2007 to 2013. So I don't think if it necessarily even makes any sense to call yourself an NRX anymore. I think it's barely even a thing. Though I think some of the ideas are very powerful and interesting, but I don't really consider it to be an active movement.
Oh, all right. Well, that's all of the introductions done away with. I want to start with sort of identifying what the problem is with, I guess, who is our great adversary? What is this progressivism sort of cathedral that we're fighting against? And by cathedral, I mean in like Mulbuggian terms. What are we up against?
Well, we're basically just up against the establishments of Western countries.
Yeah, it's pretty broad.
What is the establishment, really?
Well, what is the establishment? Who's the boss of the establishment? Is the establishment the boss, or are they taking orders from someone else? So who's the real enemy?
No, but
I
who's the
mean,
boss?
I mean, this is a thing, right? I mean, if a leftist were in this room right now, they'd say that, Donald Trump is the establishment of America because, the Republican Party has the majority in the Senate, and Donald Trump is the president, and he's appointing all these Supreme Court justices that have a more normie conservative bent, something like that, and they'd say, "Oh, we're radically out of power." But on the other hand, a conservative, a right winger like us, could point to things like the general trend of society going back 100 years. This sort of atmosphere within academia and within media and within corporate boardrooms. As Moldbug said, for every 10 libertarian billionaires, for every libertarian billionaire, there's 10 progressive billionaires, and that have 20 times more money.
Like the way I kind of framed this problem was not necessarily against sort of the left, but more antinomianism, and deterritorialization. And by that I mean I was speaking in a voice chat a couple of days ago, and a guy kind of gave this great analogy of what we're fighting against. In DC, there's this beautiful Gothic Catholic church. It's got amazing architecture, great spirals, perfect sculptures of many of the saints. And then when you walk into it, there's a gift shop and there's a food court, and it kind of profaning the place. I think what we're up against is the idea of the food court and the gift shop in the church. Is that sort of a good? You guys think that's good reason to oppose neoliberalism?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. So this commodification of everything is a large part of the issue that we're having. That's kind of what we talk about when we mean consumerism. I know some libertarians get kind of uppity when right-wingers complain about consumerism, but that's kind of missing the point. When we talk about consumerism, we're not talking about like level of free marketness. Not that I really care about that type of stuff much anymore. But when we talk about consumerism, we're talking about a sort of willingness to commodify anything and attaining your identity from that commodification. So stuff like that, like not treating a sacred place as sacred, is a large sort of large aspect of that.
Yeah, like you're saying, Mr.
Yeah, I was going to say this is essentially Marx's idea of commodity fetishism, but adapted for a more conservative, adapted into a more conservative framework. Whereas Marx would have said that in capitalism's commodity fetishism was inherently a good thing because it was progressive. We would say, well, this is actually a bad thing because it's progressive.
Yeah, it's fair enough. It's kind of gross. It's Robert Camus' idea of replacism. The idea that one thing is it exclusively an item of utility and can be replaced with any other economic unit, man for woman, one nation for another, one people for another, one object for another object of utility. I mean, he has a lot of slack. He has a lot of shit flown at him for sort of coining the Great Replacement, but that's what he fundamentally means: the pig philosophy taking over. And like I'm not sure how to kind of combat that philosophy.
I think we're getting close, though. The real enemy is pig philosophy, in my opinion. Good Mulbaghian Carlylean that I am. But also, we need to focus in on, let's say, the people. And of course, the people aren't the movement, but we are not just, you don't fight a movement, really. You fight people in a movement. And who are the people driving this, really? Who are the enemy?
The centers of information dissemination,
Yes.
like Silicon Valley, the educational system, all the propagators of the memes, essentially, in the Richard Dawkins kind of sense of the word.
The consensus of the great and powerful.
Yeah.
The best and brightest.
Yeah.
Give the talented party.
I mean, we can say that the sort of left wing of the Cathedral is are the people who are sort of setting the agenda, and the right wing of the Cathedral are sort of resisting the agenda in a very token manner, sort of putting the brakes on it. And the dissident right just wants to take this and try and find a different direction. And I think that is its purpose in the end, but that's very broad, because we don't really know what direction we ought to be taking. That's one of the main issues. Would you guys agree with that?
I agree.
Yeah, accelerationism versus isolationism.
Yoshikoku for the win.
we were talking before the stream about Mulbug's most recent letter, or most recent blog post. Sutler's Lament did a wonderful live stream yesterday with Charlemagne about it. I guess, could we give an overview for the audience of what of what Mulbug's isolationism kind of is?
Yeah, sure. His most recent article was on the whole Wuhan flu phenomena, and the insistence at the time of many Western governments to not shut down the borders when this was clearly becoming a serious threat. And he actually, when he wrote the article, he wrote it with the assumption that the U.S. government wouldn't shut down flights to China, though they did end up doing that pretty much immediately after he finished it. And he ended up giving a small update to the article to reflect that. But the general point was still accurate, that many countries, my country included, Canada, did not shut down the borders. And a large part of the reason for that is probably that because shutting down the borders at all is a sort of admission that globalization, internationalism, whatever you want to call it, is a trend which can actually be reversed relatively easily if the political will is just there. So throughout the article, he lays out a possible vision for the future with a Japanese word that I'm not going to be able to pronounce, but that refers to the period for about 300 years when Japan was fully isolated from the entire outside world, or almost entirely. And his sort of possible vision for the future that he lays out is a world in which every country in the world just becomes fully isolated from each other. We just shut down all travel, or at least all regular travel, all trade, or at least almost all trade. And every single country is just able to develop autonomously, and we're able to have Skype conferences and stuff so we can share cancer treatment, cancer research with each other. But there's no need for actual constant cultural interactions with each other, and countries are allowed to just develop their own independent cultures. So yes, that's kind of the vision that he lays out. It's sort of intentionally absurd. I don't think anyone seriously thinks that we're ever going to get to a future where the borders of every country are completely cut off from each other. Though I think it is an interesting thought experiment. And one of the interesting points he makes is that, at least in theory, this is something that any country can just do if they want. Like if the UK decided tomorrow that they were just shutting off their borders, it might affect their economy pretty badly, but I doubt any external country is really going to force them to stop. So it is it's a sort of interesting thought experiment for a possible future. And another a good point that he makes in the article is that, as absurd as this future might sound from where we're standing here, if you were to go back 200-300 years and propose internationalism to any regular person, it would sound equally absurd to them.
Like a couple like problems I kind of have with this Japanese, like feudal Japanese model is that the American ships will eventually come to knock your doors down, like especially if you become so technologically inept, and then there's sort of like the fact that we're entirely reliant on, I guess, imports from foreign countries. Like the U.S. imports just about all of its medicine from China, and like the entire economic model of multinational supply chains is reliant on resource extraction from just about everywhere in the world, and then manufacturing in semi-industrialized countries like China. How exactly do you get away from something like that? Like you can't, or at least not in any sort of meaningful way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Like I said, I don't think it's really a realistic, possibility. I think it's mostly just an interesting thought experiment. Though, for that, but besides that, though, it is very much technologically possible to have large-scale international trade without large-scale international travel. Those two things really aren't that connected. I mean, I'm no expert on these things, but I imagine we could probably send a ship across the Pacific without needing a single person on board if you really wanted to.
You need these sort of economies of scale and sort of business regulations of scale. Like in the U.S., when we had the highway, the interstate highway systems, his system put in place by Truman, everything, like all of the roads had to be uniform and planned by a central organization. And right now, I think it's something like 40% of all funding for roads comes from the federal government. So we're kind of screwed. We kind of have to be interconnected. You can't wall off like a county without having.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, what I would say to that is, I mean, we didn't really have to do that, though. That's the thing. I mean, we're talking about this as if this was inevitable, that or that we had to create. Truman had to create the Interstate Highway, like as if it was like a matter of life and death, as opposed to this just being Truman's vanity project. Which is essentially it is. A lot of these stimulus package type deals are basically Keynesian in nature, and they're essentially like they essentially play the role of the pyramids in ancient Egypt. Give the plebs something to do in order to make them feel like they're a part of something grand. In fact, there are many libertarians who point out that the Interstate Highway actually harmed a lot of small towns because by focusing by having the central planner create this highway, it sort of made these roads that formed locally, it became obsolete, and that rendered entire communities obsolete, and so they were basically just dried up, shriveled up, and died.
It's like
This touches on so many points, though. that was a really good example to use, because it points to the problem of commodification or commodity fetishism, as Clossington phrased it. That the Mulbach points out in the Missionary Virus, that's the title of the article, that China and Japan were willing to trade a little, and they were willing to entertain visitors a little, but the main thing they wanted to be free from was political influence and foreign corruption of their political and cultural norms. And that's sort of what's creeping in, and this is really the world becoming Americanized, right?
Mm-hmm.
Commodification and commodity fetishism is Americanism. That's what's left. That's all it is at this point.
Like
it's the central planner trying to extend his grasp and turn everything into, let's say, a tourist attraction or a oil field or a mine.
Yeah, definitely fair enough. But at the same time, I don't think you can necessarily have economic freedom and social conservatism at the same time. Like you had like Chinese missionaries or Christian missionaries in China, which ultimately ended up with the Boxer Rebellion, and sort of subversion from the inside out.
That's totally outside influence. If you have Christian missionaries in China, that's exactly what they didn't want. But the Opium Wars opened up China, and then we get what we get.
I think you can have economic freedom and social conservatism. I mean, like I said, I'm not terribly worried about economics anymore, at least not the specifics. But I mean, you can have economic freedom, but still say these couple of areas just except for this. Like you can have a great deal of economic freedom. You can allow business to do whatever they want in most circumstances, but then you can say, except for porn, that's the one thing we're not allowing. I mean, even in our relatively libertine society, there's still certain things we say are outside of the market. So I don't think there's any necessary contradiction that you could have legal restrictions on certain things and say everything else we're allowing a free market for, but these things are just bad and we're not allowing a free market for them.
Like I think a sort of counterexample is sort of the breakdown of the division of the purposes of certain spaces. Like in a medieval sort of town, you had the town hall for politics, you had the market for engaging in commerce, you had the home for raising a family, and you had the church for transcendent meaning. You didn't bring money into the church. You didn't bring politics into the household. You had a separation. But I guess when you're in a concrete briefcase of an apartment watching Netflix, tweeting about the elections, and then sort of praying by yourself instead of going to church, you kind of have that breakdown. Everything is everywhere. There are no physical boundaries, and I'm not sure if you can divorce this economic freedom from social
liberalism.
Social liberalism, yeah.
Well, I mean the commodity. Okay, so you go first, and then I'll go.
Yeah, I remember something else I was going to say earlier, but it ties back into this, that nationalism in that way.
What? I'm sorry.
Nationalism as such, and this neo-Sakoku idea that Mulbach has, that's all as was commented on in his talk with Kantbot on the Tech Wars podcast. That's a very Kantian idea, and that it's very idealistic, and something has to be maintaining these very abstract things, these nations externally, and it's been the American hegemony for the past 50, 60 years that's been maintaining everybody's free trade. So yes, you very much can't have free market economics and social conservatism if we define social conservatism as some sort of self-determinacy. And value placed on traditions. The world order is going to eat that up. And if you value your past and your culture more than money, then you have to opt out and you have to do things the very hard way.
Well, what I would say to that, first of all, is that what you're talking about is, America's foreign policy is necessary to maintain free trade. We need to have all these troops stationed all around the world, burning everything in order to maintain this liberal hegemonic order that will maintain this free trade. And if if America doesn't do it, then it'll probably be something like Russia and China maintaining this international order and in propagating their views throughout the world that way. Now, what I would say to that is we need to keep in mind that free market capitalism is not. We shouldn't approach free market capitalism as if we're Marxists. Socialists, and what I mean by that is, socialists, when they talk about Venezuela and why Venezuela, for example, or why Venezuela failed. Yeah, I'm going full boomer, but I'm going to get to this. But hear me out. When socialists talk about Venezuela and make apologies for that regime, they would usually say something along the lines of, "Well, no, it wasn't actually socialist because look at how much the public sector doesn't own everything. There's 60% of the economy is privatized, and therefore it's not real socialism, guys." You don't see a lot of capitalists doing that, though. You see what you usually see. There's no such economy that's 100% free market as like an ANCAP would say it, or even a minarchist would say it. There's never existed that kind of economy. There's always been some state control somewhere within the economy, and yet we do get the benefits of this free market, as libertarians say. Libertarians will point to certain sectors of the economy and say, "Look at the benefits of free market." And what that tells us is that we ought not to be ideological about this. We can have the benefits of all the benefits that free market types say we have say come from free markets with it. So while prioritizing social conservatism over the free market, if that makes sense, we don't need to be 100% free market to gain the benefits of a free market.
I think a good sort of delineation, I guess you could make, is between sort of direct capitalist control over the means of production and managerial control. Like to what extent are private companies autonomous when just about everything they do is regulated and under the scrutiny of a centralized government planner? How formally free is a private company today compared to like pre-World War I Britain? For instance, with the healthcare market, how free is the healthcare market if just about everything must go through 20 different bureaucratic managerial systems? I mean, it's a problem. And I guess the sort of like the Bernie Sanders socialists, their answer is to formally integrate the healthcare market into the government affairs, and cut out the middleman, the informal capitalist managers with formal government managers. Meanwhile, the sort of Republicans want sort of like decentralized control, like indirect control. I guess it's like the fascist versus communist models of actual economic control and you'll never end up with like sort of like an ANCAP coming out of nowhere, taking over. Any thoughts?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we can say, I guess there's some truth to that. I mean, the what I just point out is that Republicans will use like this libertarian lingo while not really implementing all that much libertarianism, which is part of the reason why I stopped being a libertarian, because I realized that, you know, you can't really nobody who actually is in government and talks about the free market actually believes in the free market. Otherwise, their literal actions do not reflect their belief in the free market. That's like this kind of. So if they're not going to believe it, why should I? In any case,
I guess you could kind of wrap that into sort of the central theme of the sort of conservative Inc. Reaction to the Cathedral versus what we want out of a reaction to the Cathedral. Like we want all out opposition to sort of radical egalitarian progressivism, but they kind of just want to go the speed limit and not really take back any sort of cultural soft power ground. Like how do we actually fight this thing? Like how do we go about it? Like
I think that let's I'm going to stop talking and I'll talk last about my things, but
do we go for something like a soft reset or sort of like an accelerationist route, I guess, in NRX terms?
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
All right. I basically think that we have to kind of distill our ideology or ideologies or beliefs on political and social issues into certain elements and just basically put these elements into circulation. I don't think we can actually stop the phenomenon with like an instant kind of stop various kind of phenomenon that's under, I don't know how to say it, but under the control of the so-called cathedral, as you call it. I mean, they're setting the agenda, but you can always put some seeds into the ground. You know, you can always put some kind of elements into circulation. You can taint the waters, so to speak. You know, and just put some concepts into circulation and try and popularize these concepts. I mean, like, I think there's kind of a fundamental drive in people that if something is useful, it basically spreads, and people will utilize things that are useful, and that applies to concepts as well. I mean, if we have any ideological or cultural or social concepts that we want to put into circulation, which are actually useful to people, like, they're going to be spread by the people, you know. And like, it's not like we're separate from the people; we actually are the people. So we're about to have some kind of insight into the needs of the people and stuff. So I just say put some things into circulation. We can't actually come up with some kind of alternative power structure or some alternative cultural structure and expect everybody to just instantly switch from their structure to our structure, because it's not going to work. I mean, we're all just fighting over who's going to be the leader, what religion are we going to be, if any, what's our economic system going to be, etc., etc. But the concept of like self-preservation and like preservation of distinct ethnic groups, like, that is actually useful. Like, I mean, that's useful to the average family that basically wants their grandchildren to look like them, and you know, like, it's just useful, like, you know.
Like, to what extent is that what Keith Woods would call the nationalism of fools, the sort of one nation isolationist kind of route instead of a holistic global anti-progressive movement?
Well, I agree with Keith Woods and I'm not sure if Keith Woods actually agrees with kind of holistic kind of, I don't know, white globalism or something. I'm not really sure if he advocates that, but he's definitely against some kind of idea that we just isolate ourselves as some kind of return to the 1950s, because that's definitely, absolutely not going to work. I mean, we don't even want to. I don't even want to go back to the 1950s. Like, the country was a shithole. Like, I don't. No, seriously. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we have to kind of roll with the tide, I suppose. I mean, globalism and whatever international capitalism is going to make the world so culturally similar that whatever elements we put into circulation in one country, if they become popular, they're going to become popular all over the world. So we just have to make ethnic preservation popular in one country. It will spread all over the world. The Caucasians will keep themselves, they'll preserve themselves, the Africans will preserve themselves, the Asians will preserve themselves, and we're all interdependent. But like, if we're all preserving ourselves, I mean, we can't do this alone. We have to appeal to non-whites as well, actually. So if we're all preserving ourselves, that's the problem solved.
Like, I can kind of see like that image of Lincoln Rockwell of the American Nazi Party hanging out with Malcolm X and talking about like ethnic separatism. It's just a little too odd and spicy for me. But I mean, you could have something like an Alexander Dugin sort of pan. Was it like Eurasianism sort of Russia plus the EU sort of solidarity, but federalism, something like that. But
well, see, like, I mean, we can do what has been done for millennia. Basically, we can argue over borders and what's the borders of our tribe going to be. And every country that exists now was once much smaller. Okay, well, I know it goes through phases. Like, Russia used to be bigger, but you know what I mean. But it's an exception. But in the beginning, Russia was very small. Like, and it just incorporated more and more territory, more and more, I don't know, cities or towns and stuff joined into it. Different counties joined together to form a province. Different provinces joined together to form a nation, etc., etc. I'm not getting the terminology right, but every country that exists, like, was once a lot smaller than it is, and ethnically, people that are the same race usually congregate into one nation. Like, that's what usually happens. But I mean, like, and then they all share the same culture, and the culture will kind of give rise to one state that incorporates everybody of that culture. Like, especially with language, like, it will incorporate everybody with that language. So if there's a common language to the whole earth, and if there's a common monoculture of this capitalist consumerism, if that dominates the whole world, then politics is downstream from culture. So we're going to end up with a united planet. But I don't say that's a bad thing if it's, just phenomenon in progression. What I'm trying to say is that if we can somehow legitimize eugenics and the idea, which is a legitimate science and legitimately preserves, genetic code, if we can legitimize that, it doesn't matter if the world becomes a united planet. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, I personally don't care. Like, I mean, but if eugenics is legitimized, if it can somehow overcome the moral taboo that's upon it, like, then the whole problem will solve itself. The whole world will want to do it because it's useful. It does help you get rid of disease and breed healthier offspring, and like it's useful. It is a legitimate medical science, and eventually we have to overcome the moral taboos.
I mean, I'm not sure how many of us are in favor of something like an Edward Dutton sort of solution to spiteful mutants. Like, the Anabaptist here is probably the most vehement against it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very familiar with that in particular, but honestly, the stuff that Zed outlined, I think, sounds not at all like the future that I want. I do, to get back to the Moldbug article, one thing he said in there is that just like all sorts of unique things, nations are a unique and precious thing which once we lose them, we can't get them back. I like, to steal a shitlib phrase, I like the diversity of the human world. I like the different nations that exist, and I don't want them to all just be destroyed into one big global homo where we're all speaking the same language and we all have 200 IQ, and we don't have any genetic diseases. If that's the trade-off, if we're all supermen, but we lose all of our original cultures and nations, I don't really consider that to be a particularly good trade-off. that seems like the exact road that we're going down currently. The left is already reintroducing eugenics. They just don't use the word. Like when you hear the left brag about how they're aborting all the Down syndrome babies, that's eugenics. I don't know that entire vision of the future is really pretty much the exact opposite of what I want.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's okay to disagree, you know.
But I guess instead of saying something like out and out eugenics, could something like more of a much more stringent closed borders immigration policy mixed with a very pro-natalist native population kind of help out? I mean, that's sort of like the Steve Bannon kind of praxis.
Yeah, but in that situation, the nation is just a means to an end. You know, to close border. If you close borders and increase the birth rate, that's just another form of eugenics. Like when you think about it, you know, I mean, it's just the nation is just a means to an end. Basically, it's just to preserve the ethnic group. So, but that's like, I mean, I'm not saying it should be a means to an end, but like that's what it effectively is. If the policies are just increase the birth rate and close the borders.
Well, you know, as a Christian, I do believe that the nation does exist for the people. It can't be an end in itself, because only God can be an end in itself, in himself. If you know what I mean.
So God, what are you trying to say? Like, there's a scripture verse about this. Let me think. What's the scripture verse about God being the end of all things, the Alpha of the Omega, or something like?
I guess he's trying to say that a sort of religious teleology kind of rests on God as the prime mover, and
the final cause,
the final cause. I mean, I don't know how much we want to get into something like a theological discussion about teleology, but kind of the whole point of this stream is the teleology of the right and what it ideally should be.
Well,
the theology of the right, is that what you're talking about?
A teleology. So
a purpose.
The purpose.
All right.
It's just, you know, I wanted to say that I'm not. While we might not, I think we also. I think the purpose of the right, the dissident right, as it exists here online and maybe in real life, is sort of a community of truth seekers, essentially. You have people. And I'm reminded of one of Distributist's last videos before he went on hiatus, where he talked about the two main YouTubers of our era, ContraPoints and Jordan Peterson, and both of them are held up as having all the answers. You know, and you know, Jordan Peterson being the boomer conservative, Protestant type, and ContraPoints being the radical, quote unquote, leftist. And neither of them have the answers, even if their fans say they do have the answers. But Distributist at the end of that video had to admit that he didn't have the answers either. And I think that's really the essence of the right wing at this moment. We are trying to find the answers, but because we reject individualism, we know that the looking for the answers can't be just like an individual thing. It has to be something done as a community of virtue.
Like I guess the problem with both of these YouTubers is that they are both radical individualists. Like Jordan Peterson says, you know, clean your room by yourself, improve your family. Whatever you do, do not embrace some sort of mass movement because that would be anti-classical liberalism. Meanwhile, you have ContraPoints, who's kind of peak postmodern. Anyone can be anything so long as their ego permits it. Very sort of a corrupted Nietzschean mixed with God God forbid, whatever sort of SJWism she has.
He has whatever.
Well, he has a very anarchistic teleology, and I think what we want to do is provide an anti-anarchism.
Well,
we have to make the collective of utility to the individuals. Like individuals will embrace some kind of collective identity if it's of utility to them. So what does our collective have to offer? You know, I mean, what we actually have to offer. We don't have institutions. We haven't even decided on our power structure or anything. So like, what do we have to offer? The truth, I suppose. Some kind of sentiment that we want to preserve our ethnic group. You know.
Well, it's what do you actually build a movement around? Is what I'm kind of I'm kind of curious about.
I mean, I'd say the most basic thing, at least with how it exists currently, is just a desire to destroy the left. Because the dissident right, by its basic definition, is incredibly broad, and the only thing keeping like libertarians and reactionaries and monarchists and all those different sorts of groups together really is just a hatred of the left and what they're trying to do. Now, I don't think that's. I'm not saying that's what our goal, our only goal should be, but I think at least as it exists currently, that's basically the only real common goal that we hold.
Well, I would say that besides the destruction of opposing what the left is for, I think we're also looking for answers together. In a sense, we're people on the right are obsessed with dialogue and discussion, at least in comparison to left-wing YouTubers, and that's because we don't have. I think there's a sense, at least intuitively, that none of us really has a silver bullet. Even if we're certain that we an ethnocentric movement or a neo-reactionary movement or even a paleoconservative movement is the answer. We don't really have the silver bullet that will kill the left. We don't have the magic solution. We don't even really know what we are. As right wingers, we don't really know what we are, and so I think with this in mind, we should be pursuing virtue and pursuing truth as a community together, and that is the purpose of the right wing online community.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, I think we should build a broad coalition. Of practically every ideology that is against neo-lefty SJWism, I suppose. Just build a coalition. I mean, there's lots of different ideologies even in this voice chat.
Yeah. I think that sort of an immediate reaction to progressivism is not a good. It's not a good way of organizing a movement. You have to actually be for something. The sort of Reaganite, Thatcherite sort of reactions against the terrible economic policies of the 60s and 70s, for instance, it's very surface. It's very, very skin deep. And after you bust your unions and clamp down on whatever sort of socialist issues you have of the day, after that, you kind of have to stand for something. And I guess the problem with sort of a reaction to liberalism is it's kind of fallback to an anarchistic teleology. Like, what did Reagan actually stand for? Like, beyond platitudes.
Yeah, but see, like, our so-called movement is made up of lots of different communities, and when some of these communities think they can, they'll try to impose their ideology or religion or something onto the entire movement, and that's obviously going to separate their community from everybody else. I mean, they're going to have some sympathizers in other communities, but then some people who disagree will just form their own rival communities, and then like the movement will just splinter. Like, so one of the tactics of the establishment is, I believe, to actually get individuals in the movement to try and commandeer the whole thing and to make very, very specific policies about objectionable things and try and have everybody agree with their very specific agenda, I suppose. When it's not necessary, like it's not necessary at this stage. I mean, we have to get into power first before we have any policies at all. I mean, it's all just fantasy unless we're actually in power, and some people just get comfortable in kind of little cult communities, I suppose, and they try and magnify their own importance by just saying that we have the solution for the entire movement, when even if people disagree with some social force or something religious or something like that, they have to tolerate other beliefs. I mean, if they don't tolerate other beliefs, like, what are they even doing in this coalition? Like, they're just, I don't know, there's so many generals and there's not enough actual foot soldiers,
I think it's kind of the opposite problem. We have all these low-level foot soldiers and propagandists of the Great Meme War fighting it out against university professors. It's kind of a definite power imbalance. All that we can really do right now is culture jam, and have sort of like the Reaganites do political holding, and like Boris Johnson types do like a political holding action. I mean, someone in the chat said that Reagan signed no fault divorces into law. He also granted millions of illegals citizenship and opened the floodgates for illegal Central American immigration. He also made the uniform 21 year age alcohol consumption laws. Made that come into practice. He also I can't see him like any sort of real reactionary political parties coming about. I'm
No.
kind of cynical.
Well, this is the Landian thing, right? The left thrives on dialectics, the right perishes through them.
Yeah.
Let's say, and politics, democracy is dialectics inherently. There is no other way. It's a way of working mutual contradictions, but every contradiction sort of boils down to a binary where one side wins, and the side that wins is the one that's not principled always, and the right is pretty much to a fault principled, unless of course we're talking about neocons who sell out. But
I mean, they might as well be Trotskyist.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes. And how conservative are Trotskyist? And I guess another point.
The whole fucking conservative movement is founded by Trots, right? Is that the whole issue? Like Buckley and what's his name?
Like James Burnham was.
Burnham, yes.
Yeah.
Cold Warriors. Those guys.
Yeah, this also kind of reminds me of the Jordan Peterson Slavoj Žižek debate, where Žižek kind of asks Peterson, "Do you seriously believe that capitalism has been able to conserve any sort of social values?" And Peterson just kind of looked at himself and was like, "What? But postmodern neo-Marxists have subverted." But he doesn't really take into account that that actual economic policies have kind of stripped man of his sort of connection to his community. I don't know. I'm starting to ramble.
I mean, the technology might have stripped us of the traditional communities, but it has brought up. But on the flip side, it has brought us together. We would not be. None of us would be. None of us would be here in the same room if it weren't for modern technology.
Yeah, but it wouldn't exactly be necessary.
That is true, but we would have had different problems in a world where the internet had not been invented.
I mean,
the internet.
Old thing good, new thing bad. I'm not sure how helpful that is.
I mean, it's not a bad. I mean, it's not universally true, but it's a pretty. But when it comes to the left versus the right, ideas wise, I think it's generally correct when talking about modern ideas.
I mean, if you take a look at the like the Amish and Mennonite communities, it's kind of hard to find any Amish people with mental illnesses like ADD or depression. You also don't see them exactly clamoring for any sort of existential meaning.
Clamoring for, but the problem is that the Amish and the Mennonite communities, that's sort of the Rod Dreher, that leads down the Rod Dreher route of, we want to create this Benedict option where all the right wingers sort of hunker down in their communities and wait for the collapse to happen. And
that's not very helpful for building a mass movement.
Well,
can I raise my hand and say,
yeah,
we don't want mass movements, kinda? That's thinking in the political mode, and right-wingers can't think in the political mode. That's where we die. That's the trap. Come on, man.
Mass movements. All right. Well, if we are going by the NRX metapolitics, we know that the solution will involve rogue elites. Elite people, people who are in the elite class, who nonetheless have some genuinely right-wing ideas and want to see them implemented, and they're going to be the start of a sort of either soft resetting the cathedral or rebuilding after the collapse of the cathedral, whichever one will happen. And does that make sense?
Yep, that's the correct analysis. But
and
how do we attract the rogue elites then? Because we need those.
Well, again, I think it starts by acknowledging that we don't actually have the answers that we require, and that we need to, as a collective, work together to find these answers. Am I wrong here, John? According to the NRX philosophy, or
No, you're not wrong. But the incentive structure doesn't make sense. We want to attract rogue elites. That is to say, people who are right now important, sort of people who have credibility, who have status, who get to play in the sandbox, but who are also kind of on the outs. Well, maybe not on the outs, but who are not favored, let's say. So is the answer, hey, come over here and look for answers in this other sandbox that's way less smaller and has way less toys, and oh, by the way, none of the cool kids play here? Or do we
Zed, essentially, to borrow that sandbox analogy, Zed basically was arguing that we should just throw all our toys into the big sandbox and hope that the rogue elite, one of the rogue elite, and hope that get the public talking about, the general public talking about ethnic identity, and hope and pray that one of these rogue elites just so happens to stumble upon these toys, these ideas, and says, "Oh, that sounds like a good winning idea."
Yeah, we have to make. Wait, this was somebody commented on this on Twitter. It was a comment about pervasive error, the second clear pill essay. That there has to be some sort of selection mechanism that privileges truth over aesthetics for science to work. Basically, we have to make sure that scientists gain status by being truthful and not by playing political power games behind the scenes and getting appointed to important offices and thereby derive power. So how can we offer power to people?
But
yeah,
I'm sorry, but Is the goal is I thought our goal was to find out the correct ideas and then find out how to get those correct ideas to powerful people. Not are we also in the business of making sure scientists are truthful?
I see. I'm partial to the antiversity. Actually, it seems like a fairly elegant solution, if only by some miracle it can actually be implemented. And that's a big if, and that's a big miracle.
I mean, this is the thing. We all the solutions, even the elegant, all of the even the most elegant solutions on the right, on the dissident right, were just these giant miracles, these giant strokes of luck, in order to work. And that's why we need. I think that's why we need to we're still in the sort of the design phase, so to speak. We need to we're in the design phase, and we're not in the phase to start really building.
Like Settlers Lament, what's your opinion of the sort of antiversity versus institution capture route?
I don't know. Honestly, I'm incredibly black-pilled on any actual possibility of taking power. I do think the sort of antiversity thing is something we should work towards. And for that matter, we should try and infiltrate institutions as best we can. I don't know. I mean, I don't have any great strategies. My main strategy is just we should try and build the thickest communities we can. We should try to develop the best ideas we can, and we should just try to outlast this situation. And hopefully, eventually, there'll be some opportunity for us to take power. And I don't see that coming anytime soon.
Yeah.
And that's not very useful. That's not very helpful. The amount of damage that's going to be done to many Western countries is immense. In the meantime, but and if there is a better answer, I'm happy to take it. But I don't see any sort of actual path to power outside of places like Southern and Eastern Europe.
I'm actually gonna speak to the Franklin, another YouTuber, on regenerative and alternative agriculture as a possible rallying cry for a antiversity, sort of, to spring up. Maybe if we could.
Someone in the comments was asking exactly what is the antiversity.
Okay, I can explain that. The antiversity is in Moldbug's phrasing, some alternative fact-finding institution that is more right, more correct, more factual, and more truthful than the current product that's being offered, because the current product is compromised by politics. And the gist of the idea is, if you are more right, if you can offer a better product than the Cathedral, then the smart people who are kind of down on the totem pole, who are maybe doing important stuff but can't just get the funding or whatever in the current system, will be attracted over to this alternative institution. And we capture the elites that way, would make them feel important, invest them in our narrative, and then when things inevitably go to shit and the current truth sense-making mechanism falls apart, the antiversity will be there to pick up the pieces, and we become worthy this way.
All right. So I think the underlying assumption is that the current elites, whatever they're running, is unsustainable. And once you have something like a circulation of the elites, you want to have an intellectual institution capable of replacing it within the intelligentsia.
As he also pointed out on the Tech Wars podcast, that you need institutions to form these thick, structured, deep narratives. Anything that's put up by an individual will be flimsy, and it will not hold up in the long run, because the institution can just flood it away with its, let's say, its inherited goodwill. And you don't build a narrative around a person, you build a narrative around an institution.
Yeah.
Or the institution builds the narrative, rather.
Well, see, I don't think that we need to capture any elites. I think that this is a legitimate sort of cultural awakening in the general public. I mean, like I said, like people disagree with me when I say this, but I said that we need to put elements into circulation and then, hope to spread our ideas with just the appeal of our concepts. And that's why all of us are here, like, because we're all against the establishment, because there was concepts in circulation that we became aware of. We agree with the concepts. So we decided to become de facto activists.
Okay, but now I'm going to challenge you on this.
Okay.
I very much hope that we are at least the 20th% of the top. There, 90% or 80%, whatever, of people are shit. That's just a fact. You don't want the shit people to glom onto these ideas, and you don't want shit people in power. That's why we need the elite, because shit people can't do anything.
No, we don't have to have actual retards in power, but we do have to make the general uprising of the general public. And the average person is not that bad, to be honest. Like the average person is not retarded.
No,
I think
I know, but
and the idea of closing borders,
20% of the population to actually flip the intelligentsia. Like once you actually do the heavy lifting of getting a small movement started, it doesn't actually take that many people to start infiltrating and converting the elites. Once you have something fashionable that is an option to replace the current elites.
Dude, a lot of the elites probably agree with us anyway. They're just afraid to say it because, as far as they know, as far as it looks like, the general public is not going to oppose, so-called political correctness. They think the general public just tacitly endorse it, which they do. So, without any kind of widespread questioning of it, the elites are not going to come over to our side anyway. I mean, any elite that does is going to be a social pariah.
Yeah, so your answer is to make our ideas palatable and open to the public. Sort of move the cultural Overton window to include something like whatever sort of our other NRX or nationalist sort of philosophies include.
So I mean, just keep it simple and just try and convert as many people as possible. Build a diverse movement. Like we are the general public. There's no point pretending that we're not. We're not some aristocratic class. We are members of the general public who do question the establishment. So if we could just put some basic concepts into circulation, like we can create some kind of. I mean, if the concept is good, if we're gonna preach very precise and very specific things, like you all have to be a certain religion or you all have to be a certain economic persuasion and all this, like that's not going to work. Like just something simple, like this country for the natives or something like that. Like that'll catch on.
Okay.
I think something like this. Yeah.
I'm skeptical of preaching something general, because if we preach something general, then let's say we get some hangers on, we attract some attention, we get some people. If you are a principled man and you want to do a very principled thing, you are going to get stabbed in the back by the people who just say fuck it and they just want to win. See every revolution ever, and it keeps rolling on. This is not the way. This is not the way.
A good kind of example would be the Enoch Powell Rivers of Blood speech, where just about everybody, like the vast majority of people, agreed with his positions on immigration, and he had so much populist support, and yet it came to absolute naught because the intelligentsia just wouldn't back him, and he became something of a social pariah. Now, how do we?
Well, yeah.
No, he was one man.
I mean,
one man. He was only one man. Like,
I mean,
if you have a widespread general movement, you can get more people voted in.
Yeah, 70% support or something stupid.
They supported one man.
I mean, it's like
he's only one MP. Like he can only fill one position at a time. I mean, he has to have a party. He has to have like a movement behind him. Not just 70%.
Well, no, I mean
the 70% supported him just because of that one speech that he done. Before that speech, people probably didn't know anything about him. Like,
well, I mean, he was generally assumed to be a future prime minister before that speech. He was incredibly influential. I really. The whole reason we have a ruling class, we have an elite, we have an oligarchy, is because that's just how humans function. decision making has to be centralized in a relatively small group of people. It's the and that's all fine and natural. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. That's just human nature. That decision making gets centralized. Relying on, I don't know, like red pilling the public on whatever the issue is, if that doesn't flow into the actual power holders, then that won't accomplish anything. And that really ultimately needs to be the goal. It doesn't matter. I mean, to this day, stuff like open borders is generally still considered ridiculous, yet it still is more or less state policy. The ultimate goal needs to be capturing the actual vectors of power.
Specifically the information sector and the tech sector.
Yeah.
Zed, I do understand what you're getting at. You want to appeal to a sort of common sense amongst the demos, because our ideas are more in line with the common sense of the people than with than what's going on in the heads of some brainiac who wants to destroy whiteness. But the brainiac who destroys whiteness, he has more of a say in what's happening in politics than the average person. And even if we sort of collectivize even if we were to get all these different people supporting like a white nationalist institution or whatnot, or an Irish nationalist institution, it wouldn't really. If we don't have people who are very rich and well spoken within this institution actually doing things, then it's not going to really go anywhere, because as things get bigger, we need these institutions will need to have people in charge to sort of communicate faster and make decisions faster.
Yeah, but if you build it, they will come. We have to build it first. We have to have something for these intellectuals and elite people to come to. And if we have a ready-made foundation of a community of just average people who object to transgender people being compulsorily brought into schools to teach their children about sexual fluidity and stuff. Like, if the average member of the general public objects to that sort of stuff, and they all form a community, then the intellectuals and the elite can come to it. And
I think the problem with that is that. Yeah, go on.
That's the opposite.
Yeah, no,
okay.
yeah, that's like 2 decades ago. Everyone in every Western country understood that sodomy was evil and disgusting. Like, this was like 80% plus support. And now in every Western country, accepting sodomy and gay marriage is just the mainstream opinion, even among conservatives. These were mass movements. These had huge organizations opposing these sorts of things, and they all just got bulldozed. The same thing is going to happen with transgenderism, even if it's even more objectionable than the normalization of sodomy.
The average person is actually the average person opposes transgenderism. If you were going to ask, for now, but my point still stands. The average person already does support, already opposes transgenderism. If you were going to ask them to support any of the given radical policies that our leaders are implementing, like California, for instance, wants to ban people from ban stores from having male and female sections, or including restrooms. The average person would say, "Well, no, we don't want that." But the problem is that the people who are responsible for giving the average person their news and educating them, those people all agree with it. And that's really what we're trying to get at, DT. It's that the opinion of the average person can change overnight, according to like whoever's in charge. Like, how can we, if the people in school, if all the schools are teaching that preserving your people is just bad, then the mass of people are just going to say that it's bad without even considering your idea.
Yeah,
and
well,
what will we do about that?
Well, I think that there's a kind of natural revulsion for some of these politically correct concepts. Like, I mean, your nature, your very, biological self-interest and your biological prerogative to ensure the continuity of your genes. That's going to make you naturally, I don't know, you're going to find some concepts in society.
People don't think in genes. People don't think about their genes at a subconscious level, maybe, but their forebrain is inhibiting their hindbrain in a lot of these things.
I think to kind of back up what Zed is saying, a lot of young people have no skin in the game. They don't have kids. They don't have like any sort of equity or housing. They don't have a stable job. How do you have skin in the game? And why would you want to conserve anything if you have nothing to actually hold on to? You don't have an identity. You have Netflix. You have your apartment. You have your goldfish and your cat. And you have these very very basic friends. You don't have the church. You have people without strings and no skin in the game. What do we do about that?
Well, everybody does have at least a little bit of skin in the game. I mean, like even the idea of reproduction, like if somebody is interested in a potential mate and they see that potential mate is acting homosexually, they initially, like instinctively, they will naturally see that as a kind of risk and something distasteful. So, I mean, that's going to be associated with like concepts of like so-called homophobia and stuff like that. And when the state kind of overreaches, I suppose, by shoving these concepts down our throat, like the natural revulsion is just going to be so extreme. And as well as that, once like the political correctness is so sensitive to events of dissent from political correctness, like, and they just come down you like a ton of bricks for the slightest bit of dissent from political correctness. Like eventually they're gonna make martyrs of some people who just are social dissidents, and there's going to be kind of a cultural force or something like that that's just going to represent like anti-establishment sentiment in general, which is it's going to naturally have like our kind of ideas. I mean, because it's just going to be a rejection of political correctness. Like, I mean, it's just like I don't know how to say it. Like, maybe I should stop talking.
Well, I think it's because we can't put that into words that it's not going to really catch on. But I'll try to. But I will try and argue on behalf of DT, even if I do agree with the neo-reactionary types. The regime that we are trying to rebel against in question, if there's anything we can agree on it being, we can say with confidence that it is in many ways contra naturam, or against nature. That is the very essence of the left in general. Really, it's against nature. It's against specifically human nature. And it goes all the way back to the socialists who wanted to create a new socialist man to fit their utopian vision of humanity.
Mulbug says that this sort of mentality is antinomianism, it's all about breaking the bonds and the promises that formerly held society together in favor of something new.
Yes.
You can probably explain this a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, and until we reach like something like the singularity, we're not going or some kind of gray goose scenario. We're not going. I think we can expect this sort of regime to just to collapse in on itself, because it just goes against our instincts so much that maintaining it will take more and more and more effort, more and more and more effort. And I think what we need to be doing right now is coming up with the ideas that are really going to act as the seeds, and these ideas will need to be a sort of intellectualized version of what DT is saying is just common sense. Those kind of those kinds of feelings that we can't quite put in there, that we can't quite put into words, but we can. But an intellectual type can can better articulate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure, it makes sense to me, as well as that, like the perfection that's demanded by the establishment of the population. The idea of conforming to political correctness, that it's become so perfectionist and so precise, and so sensitive to events of dissent. Like, eventually it's going to become so precise and so perfectionist that nobody will be able to reach these very high standards.
That's not how this works. Political correctness works as a political cudgel because it's capricious and because they don't care about following their own rules, because their rules only apply to the out-group. If you are a privileged member of the in-group, you can get away with certain things, unless, of course, we have some real crazy people who are sort of wagging the tail, or the tail wagging the whole dog, but that's not the usual scenario. People on the inside can get away with heinous shit, qua the Me Too scandals and so forth. But if you somehow are on the political outside or a political threat in other ways, you can expect to get hit over the head very quickly if you step out of line.
I would also point out about people rebelling because political correctness is just so demanding of them. There are several instances I've come across where these kind of libertarian types who just want to stay at home and consume porn and play video games all day.
Coomers.
Coomer types, and they're basically of the opinion that the left is bad because it's so demanding and has this political correctness. But if something right wing comes into the foray, then they'll side with the left against the right because they depend on their porn video games, and the left provides that. So if it comes to a choice between the right and the left, they'll side with the left every time, even though they say, "Oh, we oppose the left in political practice." They'll side with the left against the right.
Like I think Dostoevsky in the Brothers Karamazov, his Grand Inquisitor kind of scenario is very analogous to what you're saying. Like, I think the Grand Inquisitor says to Jesus, a whole lot of people are willing to starve themselves for the cause, but most people, when they're starving and hungry, will sell you Jesus Christ out for a loaf of bread. And kind of on that sort of term, it's much easier to be a consumer than an ascetic sort of type.
And that's kind of why when we're out and trying to come up with answers, we do need to be pursuing virtue while we're coming up with answers, because otherwise we'll fall into the trap of the consumer who only he opposes the left on political correctness, but if a real right winger shows up, he'll side with the left against the real right winger, even though 5 minutes ago he was banging on about how the left is going to end civilization. Tim Pool is probably the biggest parody of this. Like, he's not a coomer as far as I could tell, but he's like but he's like this. He always makes clickbait videos. The left is destroying the West, guys. Haven't you heard? The leftists are destroying the West. Look at all these socialists they're promoting. Look at all this racism in the left. The left is destroying everything. But he'll vote for Bernie Sanders because
he's Democrat. He has no kids. He lives in a van. He'll criticize social justice and feminism all day in and out, but he won't live out his own sort of. He won't live a good life, and he won't promote the good life.
And he will fight tooth and nail. Let me tell you, if he had if he felt that the right wing was an actual force in politics, he would side with the left faster than you can blink. Like he votes for Bernie Sanders. He plans on voting for like Bernie Sanders and all these left-wing politicians even now. Like
I don't think he supports Bernie anymore. He was like Yang Gang and Tulsi Gang.
Yeah, he was Tulsi Gang and Yang Gang. Yeah, but still, it's like he's voting for. He's just these people are just going to oppose you, Zed, if you don't. If you make it just anti-political correctness, you can't really count on the stringentness of political correctness to win you followers, because those people are fair weather followers. Essentially, they just don't want to. They'll just do whatever is easy for them.
Yeah, pretty much. Like I mean, you also see this within like Ben Shapiro types who will cast out any sort of Goiperism or any sort of right-wing purity beyond the neoliberal sort of establishment. And he'll condemn them in the harshest terms. And you also have like the Dave Rubin types. It's like, oh God, Dave Rubin. But you have that's what you get when your entire shtick is SJWism bad. You get Dave Rubin, the sort of palatable dissent.
Dave Rubin is literally the guy who prays to the Jesus nuts, the Jesus nut. Let's say. Do people not get that joke? Oh, well. Let me explain. In the Moldbug essay, Pervasive Error, he makes an analogy. The truth market that sort of regulates science is the Jesus nut of our political establishment. It's the nut that holds the rotor to the helicopter. That's the Jesus nut. And you don't pray to the Jesus nut and hope it stays in place. You inspect it for cracks. And Dave Rubin is the literal person who prays to the Jesus nut. He just prays that the truth market works, when in fact it doesn't. And he's not looking at it.
Like in the comments, it's like Ben Shapiro types. I should be more specific with, or a little bit more broad with like sort of like Daily Wire and what was his name? Dennis Prager. Like Dennis Prager on his time on Dave Rubin said, keep doing what you're doing. You're a very good, useful idiot for us.
That was always said that. Martin Webb. Actually, Martin Webb actually said, just make sure you never stop strawmanning the basement dwelling libertarians, please. We've barely even been talking about the libertarians. We've been talking about consumers who are mainly like they're only libertarian when they're against the left, and when they're against the right, they're leftists, and they can't be differentiated from leftists.
Yeah.
And we're also talking about boomer conservatives and Dave Rubin.
Like I have a lot of problems with like Cato Institute types, but I personally come from sort of like a Hoppian sort of paleo libertarian background before finding NRX. So I have nothing but admiration for those types of right wing culture warriors within the libertarian movement. But it's the Dave Rubins, classical liberalism, my free markets, my free society types who are not on our side. They will not oppose any sort of culture, like culture war, or they won't fight on the culture war. Like,
well, the problem with Cato Institute is that they essentially want the status quo minus the welfare state, and that's honestly not a tenable solution. Like, it's I'll have to make a reaction video to this one really bad Cato type Institute type that talks about this, but it's just these people are no different from like boomer conservatives or center leftists, essentially.
like Mr. Jia Khan and I were discussing sort of the political implications of the movie Joker, and essentially how the Joker, his problem is that he lost every sort of string attaching him to society and holding him up. Like he lost his only family. His relationship was a lie because of mental illness. He lost his welfare gibs. And so what does he do?
He lost the narrative of his father.
He lost the narrative of his father. And so what does he have left? Just anarchy. And I guess what happens when you cut off like that single line of welfareism, what happens when you delete that? It's just one less string. It's a bad string, and it has perverse incentives attached to it. But if that's all you've got, then Macatoism will not last to something like the Bernie Sanders types who do have a cohesive political movement backing them. Well, I mean that's just my basic analysis.
Yeah, this is the libertarian fallacy, right? In his essay, Mobley on Carlyle, Mobley pretty much sets up the pyramid of, in a state of war, advance towards peace. In a state of peace, advance towards order. In a state of order, advance towards law. And in a state of law, advance towards freedom. That freedom is the pinnacle of the pyramid that you're striving towards, but it's also the first thing that has to get sacked if more fundamental aspects of society are threatened, like order or peace, so forth. And the libertarians start at the top. Libertarians want to make order the ultimate, the foundation of everything. And so libertarians cannot be counted on to preserve a societal peace at all.
Yes, they can't be relied on for peace, but when you kind of look at, say, the effects of war, constant war on society, like it's hard to say that you will ever have the big guns let down. You will always you will never see Republicans or Democrats take back the Patriot Act. That's here forever. Lincoln, after militarizing for the Civil War, he never let Confederation take any sort of. He never lets the states be a confederacy again. It's too. He federalized everything. Woodrow Wilson, the effects of that he had socially, taking on like very, very stringent social powers during World War I. The federal government never let that go. The alphabet soup kind of institutions that FDR instated, they will never be cut. So I get the libertarian analysis, even if you do have the institutions of order, that does not necessarily, I don't think that I don't know. I don't see any sort of real order in this. I see anarchy with a bunch of bureaucracies on top of them.
Yeah, but that
anarcho-tyranny.
Yeah, anarcho-tyranny.
So, sort of. It's the government by process. It's the government by steam, right?
Mm. Well, it's government by fiat too.
Yeah.
Like,
With very little.
yeah.
Yeah. Go on. I
Well,
was gonna say
yeah,
anything important.
Well, I was just going to say that these kinds of libertarians, going back to sort of the Beltway libertarians, these kinds of libertarians are just trying to. We all agree that they're essentially the same as like the boomer conservatives. They're progressives driving the speed limit. Or something. It's just that they're a slightly different variation on the same thing.
I mean, I don't quite agree. Like Hans Hermann Hoppe and his sort of democracy, the God That Failed sort of.
Well, I'm not talking about.
You're talking about
Hans
the
Hermann
Beltways.
Hoppe. The Beltways, yes.
Yeah, like I was at this one conference, and the president of, or the vice president of, I think it was Cato. He was a really squishy kind of dude. He essentially said that you've never had it so good. The free markets has provided more freedom and social liberation than any sort of force ever seen in the history of man. And he ultimately kind of covered for any sort of social progressivism with this just very, it's a progressive view of history. Like I've got nothing but sort of contempt for these sort of like beltways who aren't willing to do what's necessary.
What do you make of Michael Malice? I think it's kind of interesting. Okay, he's an anarchist and he's kind of swimming in our pond, but yet he still makes apologies for quote unquote amazing stuff going on today.
Like he celebrates sort of like the kitsch art that came from like Andy Warhol. He celebrates sort of like the sort of like the elites turning their, or like the disillusion of the elites within the cultural community. He celebrates the internet liberating everyone and allowing for our ideas to propagate, but he doesn't trust institutions fundamentally, and he's not willing to take back the institutions. He's just a force of anarchy. Like, I don't think he's our guy. Like, he's certainly not our guy socially.
He's a leftist at heart, because he cannot, but he's also been burned by the narrative of the Soviet Union. But he is this type of very open, artistic, aesthetic person. So he can only route his sort of contempt for stone cold authority through this anarchism. Anarchism is left wing inherently, right?
Martin Webb. Okay. Hey, Martin Webb. Yeah, Martin Webb actually is in the comments saying that anarcho-tyranny is an oxymoron. Yeah. You go and read some of Sam Francis's work on anarcho-tyranny. Essentially, the idea within a paleoconservative and neo-reactionary circles is that the state criminalizes the ordinary behaviors of law-abiding citizens. That's the tyranny, while allowing criminals to just run rampant through society. That's the anarchy. This is it, and anarcho-tyranny is just another word for clown world, where everything is just upside down. It's why it says everything is simultaneously so chaotic, yet we feel less free and less in our place than ever before. Whereas, a medieval peasant, yes, he wasn't able to. He did have all these institutions surrounding him, telling him what to do, but but in some ways he was more free than the average person of the modern day.
Yeah, it's sort of this horrific Brave New World kind of sort of like Brave New World kind of society in which sanctity has has kind of broken down. You're very free, but you have ultimately no options. You have the option of Coca-Cola or Pepsi. You're just kind of stuck with that. And
you can make, as Ted Kaczynski, Ted Kaczynski would have put it as, you're free to make any option. You're free to make any choice that does not matter.
Yeah. So that's really depressing. I kind of want to let's kind of like wrap this up on something of a high note. Do we have any clear pill, or do we have any white pills to give out, or are we just kind of stuck?
White.
I mean, we can. How about we go around and give our final thoughts on this topic of the purpose of the right wing, and maybe share some white pills. How about Jan? It could be like Jan, Zed, Settler, myself, and then Clossington.
Whoa. We started with you first, and you're not going to be able to wiggle out of this.
Oh, well, you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is more time.
Yeah.
All right. I'll give some closing thoughts myself. Well, I just sort of reiterate that although, modernity has put us in a mess, we have to keep in mind that every era of society has had its own unique problems and its own ups and downs, essentially. And this era of modernity or post-modernity will pass in the end, as all the previous eras will. And all the problems of this era will become like a dream. But new problems will arise in the end too. But right now, as people of this era, of this time, we have to use the tools that we are given and try to come to some kind of solution. And I reiterate, the way we come to solution is through a community centered around pursuing the truth and pursuing virtue. And this can only, and I must emphasize that, contra Jordan Peterson, this is not something that any one of us can do. It's only something that we as individuals can do if we share some part of in a community. Because ultimately, this sort of truth seeking, this virtue seeking, is collective. The collective has a responsibility to the individual, and the individual has a responsibility to the collective. We are either united we stand, or divided we fall, as they say. And even for all the faults of the internet, it has brought us together. I think that in itself is a white pill. I wouldn't have become without the internet. I'd still be like a crazy SJW.
Oh,
so
that's as good of a white pill as you can get. Zed, do you have any final thoughts on the purpose and direction of the right?
Well, I hope I said this right. I'm probably not going to say it right because I'm not really used to talking on live streams. But anyway, the way people either inhale or exhale, like there's some sort of proverbial one, or it's either a 1 or a 0 to use binary code. The kind of thing. I think there's some sort of something similar to that in whether or not people consent to concepts that are in circulation in society. So we either consent or we don't consent. And long story short is, I think that every concept that's in circulation is inherently going to provide the opportunity for its opposite to manifest. I mean, political correctness, or global homo, as you call it, that sort of stuff. Maybe that's the 1, and maybe that's going to propose a kind of 0, some sort of do not consent. Like, just the fact that it exists is going to create opposition to it, and all of the people that oppose the concepts that are in circulation in society are eventually going to reach a kind of critical mass of some kind of community. And in this community, we're all going to share basically broadly the same kind of ideas. And in that community, my white pill is that eventually this community will develop some kind of sophisticated power structure and an alternative intelligentsia. And it's got, like, we can see it already. Like, I mean, this online community of, so-called alt-right or far-right or whatever they want to call this, it's already like a kind of, it's almost like some sort of Greek philosophy zone, I suppose. Like, this is the place where, like, intellectual discussions and free thought comes. They come into our circles because you can't do it when the society is just dominated by political correct orthodoxy. This is the only place. This is where people breathe free intellectually. So this is where the free thought comes. This is where the idealization of truth comes. Like where the establishment and the children of the system, the SJWs, basically, where they have the establishment and this dogma and of orthodoxy of political correctness. Like, we have basically the general public. We can offer the general public, like, free thought, thought without ideology, without their ideology at least. And eventually we're going to reach critical mass. And I just said on this, like, we'll reach critical mass, we'll form a community, and then we'll have an alternative power structure. So we will get the elites, but, like, if you build it, they will come. So as soon as we coagulate, I suppose, then that's when the counterattack begins, I suppose.
Very good. Very, very good.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say.
Ian the Baptist, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. What said there on the end is actually very poignant, and that the goal, I'm going to propose a short-term goal for the right, and that would be to become a citable, like people can cite you and refer to your ideas. Everybody can develop this at some level, and this is ultimately the goal of the anti-versity, right? That we should be a knowledge base unto ourselves. And so the average foot soldier should not be expected to know the entire theory inside and out, but he can cite, let's say, Clossington and his treatise on X, and just say, no, go read this dude. He can explain it better than I can, and so forth. That's a good short-term goal. And I don't know if we can really capitalize on a lot of these things, but it's worth trying. And I don't know, white pills, Corona-chan, somehow. I don't know if this has staying power in the public consciousness, but a lot of countries are closing borders and implementing fairly draconian social and public health policies, right? Denmark just basically shut down everything and decided that, okay, the health minister or his appointed vassals can just enter any house and forcibly quarantine you if you display symptoms or some such. This pandemic is maybe the first real glimpse for 2 or 3 generations into real authoritative power in many places in Europe and in the West, and that could be quite necessary. And I hope it sticks. I hope something of it sticks in the public mind.
All right, fair enough. Sellers Lament, final words.
I'd say my main white pill is that, though I'm not terribly optimistic about the short term, I think at least the long term, we can find solace in the fact that I don't think it's possible for the left really to win. Because as Mr. Jia Khan said earlier on, the left is in very many ways fundamentally opposed to human nature. And though they may do a lot of damage in the meantime, and they may harm our societies in a lot of ways, I think there's no way that the sort of things they're doing can really perpetuate themselves indefinitely.
All right, the evolutionary argument. Well, Well, if there's one white pill, it's oh, right? Nope, not that one. Not that one. Where's the one that says oh, here it is. Do you know what's pathetic? Not executing criminals on the spot. Now that's a white pill in and of itself. I think that's kind of a good note to end on.
Spicy.
Very spicy. We need more spice. We need more content creators. And I just want to thank Mr. Jia Khan, Zed, and the Baptist and Settlers Lament for coming on and discussing these sorts of issues. Thank you guys. And I guess that's it.